let's get the ball rolling. I believe Brenton is going to go first. So if you could just give us your opening statements on this very interesting topic. I'm so excited I get to be a part of this topic on whether or not there is systemic racism towards whites. Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So the topic tonight, does anti-white systemic racism exist, is one of the more volatile and emotionally charged topics we could address. And I will be taking the negative position. It's very volatile, particularly in the fallout of the protests, reactionary violence, and the epidemic of state repression that is sweeping the nation, due in large part to our failure as a country to address the ongoing problem of police violence and institutional discrimination that targets minority communities. Now, before we begin, I'd actually like to observe just a few seconds of silence for Garrett Foster, who died tragically and heroically while escorting his disabled wife during a Black Lives Matter march in Austin, Texas. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Racism is something that has been inherent in the United States since the foundation of this country. As part of our national origin rests on the uncomfortable truth that America was built on the extermination of one race and the enslavement of another. One could say that racism is in a way America's very own original sin. And it is one that we are still reckoning with today. That said, grand socioeconomic narratives are never so simple as one group of people having bad ideas and acting on them. Bad ideas don't come from nowhere, and they aren't adopted arbitrarily. As such, it's important that when we talk about race, we need to define our terms. In my debate with prominent neo-Nazi J.F. Garipe, I gave a definition and explanation of institutional racism that is rooted in the material and sociological concerns of a given society. And this is the definition I believe we should be working with when we talk about institutional racism. Why? Well, because it's very easy to beg the question when talking about such a complex and controversial issue. And if we simply stick to what we feel racism is or feel what racism should be, we risk missing the core of the issue entirely. If we are to establish the existence of anti-white institutional racism, we must understand what race is, who or what creates it, and what purpose it serves and how it is utilized by society. And so we come to two, for lack of a better word, memes, which is to say elements of culture and systems of behavior that may be passed from one individual to another by means of imitation. In other words, monkey see, monkey do. The first meme is race, and the second meme is the state. In this context, to understand the first, you must understand the second. So what is the state? To put it simply, in the words of Max Weber, renowned German sociologist, philosopher, and noted anti-Marxist, the state is any institution that manages to claim a total monopoly over the justified use of force within a given geographical area. Now, this definition of the state is distinct from the common parlance in one key feature, namely that it does not include any political institution that exists primarily for the mediation and creation of policy. The state is not the government. It is the military and the police. The difference between the government and the state is the difference between the police officer who murdered George Floyd and your local city councilor. It is the difference between a senator and the ununiformed federal mercenaries who are currently blackbagging random protesters in Portland without due process and interrogating and holding them with neither charges nor trial. Contrary to popular belief, the state's primary function is not to protect people. Not individuals, not groups, and not ethnicities. The state's function is far more specific: to secure and defend valuable property. Now, this might sound radical or even shocking to some of you, but our society right now is based upon this principle. To quote Adam Smith, civil government, so far as it is instituted for the security of property, is in reality instituted for the defense of the rich against the poor, or from those who have some property against those who have none at all. Or to go back even further to John Locke, the great and chief end of men's uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property, to which in the state of nature there are many things left wanting. So the state, which is to say the people who are currently tasked with and doing an exceptionally poor job of quelling these protests and riots which I might remind you they themselves are responsible for, their goal at all times, whether the individual actors know it or not, is not to keep the peace. Rather, the peace is kept in order to keep the property, which is to say to serve the interests of the state's primary constituency, the wealthy, the powerful, the elite. Now, Why is this important to understand when it comes to race? Well, for two reasons. One, here in America, due to the historical circumstances surrounding the founding of this nation, wealth and social class are currently divided with very little exception along racial lines. And two, more fundamentally, race itself is a product of the state's quest to remain in power and preserve the property of its primary constituents. Now let that sink in for a moment, because it's a big idea and it's not how most of us are used to thinking about race. Race itself is primarily a product of the state's quest to remain in power and preserve the property of the elite. Everything the state does is to this end. Now, we usually think of race in terms of skin color and facial features or ethnicity, but that is to miss the forest for the trees. In her book, Towards a Political Philosophy of Race, Dr. Falguni Sheth of Emory University puts forth the idea that race, as we currently understand and practice it, is a construct of sovereign power, which is to say those who are in charge in a given society are the ones who create race. These are the people whose property the state is primarily interested in protecting. And protecting from who? Well, from you and me, and especially those populations that are perceived to be unruly. In the words of Cersei Lannister, everyone who isn't us. Now, you'll note that I've said perceived, and that's an important word, so make note of it. Populations that are perceived to be unruly are targeted by the state. The state cannot definitively know who is unruly and who is not until they act. Just like the state cannot distinguish from someone who's white from someone who's black or Arabic, but looks white enough to pass. It's not about what you actually are. It's about what a cop or a judge thinks you are, which is why we oftentimes racially motivated stops go down after things get dark, because you can't tell who's driving the car. So if sovereign power thinks you're unruly, well, mister, you'd better watch out and stop being so unruly. This perception and attitude is the systemic racism that targets the Black community. It is the core of implicit white supremacy. And implicit white supremacy is much more insidious than the crude racial stereotypes and bigotry that may be adopted by certain individuals. To be racialized is to have one's propensity towards criminal, antisocial behavior be assumed by those in positions of authority, based solely upon the way a person appears to look visually. All other forms of racial discrimination flow from this assumption, and as such, institutional racism physically cannot target white people. Individuals may be bigoted towards white people, but a cop or a judge is not going to sentence a white person more harshly simply because they are a white person. It literally cannot happen in the United States. It cannot happen in the first world, and it likely cannot happen anywhere on the globe, at least at this point in history. However, this is not to say that white people are not oppressed. And I will say unequivocally that 99% of white people are systemically oppressed. And let me say that again, just so absolutely no one misunderstands me when I talk about this. Approximately 99% of all white people experience systemic oppression within their lives. But it is not racist systemic oppression, because white people, at least in the West, are seen as the default, the standard citizen. Authorities cannot categorically see them as potentially dangerous. Whiteness is to race what baldness is to hair color, or atheist is to religion. It is the absence of a concept rather than a positive identity. So in the light of this, how are white people systemically oppressed? Well, you heard it in my previous Game of Thrones reference. To quote Cersei Lannister, anyone who isn't us. 99% of white people are oppressed by capitalism, because 99% of white people do not own significant valuable property, and as such we are regulated to the position of workers, where we must sell our labor to a capitalist under the conditions that are inherently favorable to that capitalist. If we don't like it and we refuse, we will be denied food, housing, medication. We will quickly find ourselves out on the street and in the crosshairs of law enforcement. We will be made to seem unruly, not for our skin, but for our clothes or economic status. And this is borne out by the data, because when crime rates are controlled for poverty, the disparity between racial groups virtually evaporates. The point is that whenever you want to destroy someone or make yourself comfortable with someone else destroying them, you must always define them as unpeople, because this erodes compassion and silences the voice of your conscience. I see you and you look a little like me, and therefore I think maybe you are people and maybe you can love. Maybe you feel and experience all the joy and pain and regret that I experience. Maybe we're brothers or sisters, and maybe we can live together. But those people over there across the street in another country or city or in Africa or China, I'm not sure they're people, and I'd rather not care about them. So I'm going to imagine they might be animals or idiots or robots. Those are usually the big three. The point is to stake your bloodlust or quiet your anxiety, to serve your vanity. You use language and through that language to make their lives worth less and your own life worth more. And what you don't realize is that as you do this to them, sovereign power does the same thing to you. Kings are always paranoid. That's why they sit on a throne with their back to the wall, because when your back is to the wall, no one can stab you in it. But if we are to survive on this planet, if we are to thrive and build a better world for ourselves and our children, we have to see through this illusion. We must see through the illusion of race. We have to stop seeing the other tribe as an invader, because at the moment, the only thing on this planet that can kill us, that can end the human race, is us. And so we have to learn to live with ourselves, because if we don't, we'll destroy ourselves through war, through famine, by the spreading of disease, or by the power of a nuclear holocaust. We must live together, or we will die alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenton. And Armin, if you could give your opening statements, or feel free to respond to anything that Brenton has said thus far.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a opening statement. That's why we let Brenton go, so I could respond to what he's saying. But I just want to say, like, even if I disagree with him, he's such a great writer. Like, I was very passionate. I was very fun to listen to. But yeah, so I don't know how to follow after that. But I just want to make it clear that I'm not at all here to suggest that racism against Black people or other minorities in the United States does not exist. I'm also not here to mention that the racism against I think, let's say Black people, so I don't have to keep saying and other people, like that racism against Black people in the United States is not systemic. I'm not suggesting that. It is systemic. I'm also not here to suggest that racism against white people in the United States is worse than racism against Black people. It's not even close, right? So I'm not saying any of those things. But I do think that we might have a problem with definitions, and if we don't, if we disagree on definitions, that we might be talking over each other with it. Like, we're not even talking about the same thing. We might be saying things that we even would agree with each other if we were using each other's definitions. So the definitions that I'm working with is the ones that are like show up if you search for them. For race, the definition I'm working with is a race is a grouping of humans based on shared physical or social qualities into categories generally viewed as distinct by society. Like, there's no involvement of state and how they manage people and what their agenda is. That doesn't come into my definition. And also, when it comes to institutional racism or systemic racism, I understand that some people have different definitions for this, but most people use these interchangeably. And the definition that I use for that is the one that shows up. Like, I'm comfortable with what the common definition is, which is a form of racism that is embedded as normal practice within society or an organization. It can lead to such issues as as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among other issues. Another way to explain systemic racism, and again, we could debate whether it's helpful to define racism in, the systemic racism or not, or whether implicit racism is real or not, because there's debates about that. There's not a consensus on that. But assuming all of that is valid, systemic racism is, the way I understand it, is something as opposed to explicit form of racism. Explicit form of racism is intentional, is based on individuals, and it's basically what most people traditionally recognize as racism. I hate you. I hate these group of, like, I would never let my daughter, for example, date a Black person. That kind of crap people say, like, oh my god, yeah, you're a goddamn racist. That's explicit form of racism. Systemic racism, could be the source of systemic racism, could or maybe the point about systemic racism is that it doesn't have to be intentional, right? And it doesn't have to be even based on individuals bias. It could be though. So systemic racism, the way I understand it, is either based on implicit bias or racism by outcome, right? So implicit bias is a form of racism where people have these biases that they're not aware of. There are some tests that suggest that most people do have those biases, whether they're white, black, or whatever. But I don't. Those studies have been disputed. I'm just going to assume right now that they're true. I haven't. It's hard for me to analyze them myself. I'm open to being proven wrong on this, like because I'm not an expert on this. But I can. Right now, I think we're both on the side that implicit bias is a thing. It's real. But and also we have racism by outcome. Racism by outcome doesn't require intentional or unintentional racism, right? It's basically if you have a system that produce after adjusting for everything justifiable, like crime rates, like percentage of population, or anything else that any other variable that will justify a biased outcome. If you adjust for all of that, if you still get biased outcome, even if nobody in the system is explicitly or implicitly racist, the system itself is racist, right? So, for example, one reason why we might say that the United States is systemically racist against Black people, and that doesn't require intentional racism by anybody in these institutions, is when you even after adjusting for population and even after adjusting for crime rates and severity of the crimes, you still seem to get harsher sentencing against Black people based on how dark they are. Even if the judges are Black, like there's something within the system that is producing these racist outcomes, even if that is not the intention of anybody in the system. So that will make the system racist, even without requiring intention from the individuals within the system, right? So those are the two sources of systemic racism, and those are real. I think what we can acknowledge, though, is based on these definitions, as bad as systemic racism is, it is progress to have reduced explicit racism. Explicit racism, intentional racism, is, in my opinion, worse than unintentional racism or racism by outcome, right? And yeah, and the fact that reducing explicit form of racism or intentional form of racism does not mean our job is done. Obviously, any form of racism is bad. But if I could, but I could, I think it's fair to assume that a systemic form of racism is more widespread than any form of explicit form of racism, no matter how much explicit form of racism you have, right? So if you see widespread explicit form of racism in any society, you could assume that you must also have a lot of systemic form of racism in that society, right? So what I have to admit is that this is the reason why I think there is at least some systemic form of racism against white people in the United States, because of the existence of obvious explicit form of racism. This is hypothesis, right? So what I have to admit is that there is no data. There's absolute zero data that will prove what I'm saying, because this hasn't been researched. When it comes to systemic racism against Black people, there is plenty of data that proves that beyond any doubt. Okay, that systemic racism against Black people is a thing, based on the definitions that I just gave. And there is zero data that shows that systemic racism against white people is a thing. So my position is only a hypothesis, and I'm happy to be proven wrong if once there's data on this, right? But I think it is so hypothesis, or you could say an educated guess based on anecdotes. Again, anecdotes doesn't prove anything, but the examples that we've seen on outright open accepted form of explicit racism against white people, and the fact that how the limited backlash against it and the normalization of it in society, to me, suggests that given how accepted explicit form of racism against white people is in countries like United States or United Kingdom or some other places, this normalization of explicit form of racism must have, or I think, again, I'm happy to be proven wrong, must have somehow creeped into institutions, as you know, and within the way that organize educations. Again, you mentioned the state, but based on my understanding of systemic racism, it could be private institutions, public institutions, the government, society, media, entertainment, any form of any institutional racism could exist within any of these, and it doesn't have to be widespread and everywhere. As long as you have it within some institutions, based on the definition that I read, you do have institutional racism, or systemic racism, right? So, for example, when based on the definitions that I'm going by, uh, white people, and again, I understand that some people say race is not a thing, and if you're looking at it from a biological perspective, that is true. The only other race that we had was the Neanderthals, and we killed them. But so, from a biological perspective, there's only one human race left. But when we're talking about the common use of the word of race, we do, like, if we because, for example, words mean different things in different fields. For the word law, for example, in mathematics, means something completely different than the word law in law school, right? So race means something completely different in a biology class than when you're talking about race in, I don't know, society, or it's just common use, I think. And based on that definition of race, not in biological sense, yes, the race is a thing. Yes, it's made up, but there's many things that are made up that we decided to. Doesn't mean that it's not meaningless. Like, I don't know, contracts are made up, but it's not meaningless. It's a good thing that we define them. And race is also something that we made up, and it means it's a real thing, even though we made it up. And based on that definition, white people are a race. Black people are a race. Persians, Arabs, not Jews, Ashkenazi Jews. They're all different races. Um, and you could be racist against white people. And something we have to first acknowledge is that if I can't convince you that, I don't know if you agree with me, that explicit form of racism against white people exists, then I don't know. We can't even move forward to talking about whether this racism is systemic or not, right? So I think the first step is to even see if we could agree that if people say, "Fuck white people," "cancel white people," "all I want for Christmas is a white genocide," are these like all white people are racist, saying white people are responsible for all the evils in the world? These things that following a lot of, I'm not saying you ever said that, but following a lot of far left content creators, I don't know what to call them, woke people, far left content creators. Yeah. Again, I also want to make it clear. What?
Woke scolds is the term. I think you're looking at.
But I also want to make it clear that if I say far left, this has nothing to do with the left. Like, I don't want to come across as suggesting that even even everybody on the far left or the left thinks like this. Okay, but this is mostly an idea that comes from far left circles, and it is a common view. Like, it's not a majority view, but it is widespread. It's big enough for us to acknowledge that a lot of people hate white people. Okay, and I've seen examples of it. In the past 5 years, it seems to be becoming more and more mainstream, and also it used to be that it just doesn't get the backlash that other form of racism gets. Like, the same things that people would say about Black people, Jewish people, Arabs, or any other a group of people. If you say the same statements against white people, the form of systemic racism that I saw, it was like, okay, you just you can get away with it. But now I'm seeing that actually different organizations and different media, mainstream media, are actually even, spreading those ideas, spreading hatred towards white people, or talking about the whole group of people in general terms. I mean, even if you don't want to, I hope that even if you don't want to acknowledge that, define that as racism, that would be just a semantics. I'm hoping that you acknowledge that that's disgusting and wrong to talk about a whole group of people in such general terms. And as we go forward, I could talk about some examples of what I've seen to show you why within media, within different institutions, why just outright racism against white people is normalized and accepted. But whether or not we agree on the definition, I mean, I would be happy to for you to be like, okay, this is not racism, but it's disgusting, vile, and nobody should talk about any group of people in such general terms, whether I call it racism or not, right? I would be happy if you would say something like that, right? But that would be that would be the explicit. So, for example, then
Probably have maybe a minute left.
Okay, I'll come up with the examples once we go back and forward forward in the discussion. So I'm happy to end it here.
You got it.
All right, go ahead and take it away, Brenton.
Awesome. So the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to acknowledge what you're saying, specifically about things that you've seen targeted towards people who superficially resemble me. And I want to applaud you for having that compassionate reaction, because it does suck when people are mean to somebody for like bad reasons. I have experienced, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm not going to call it racism. Not because I wouldn't call that racism on the street necessarily, but we have to understand the difference between, and you even actually brought this up in your opening statement, so you do understand this difference, between a technical definition and a colloquial definition. Because words they're symbols, and they mean different things in different contexts. And sometimes there are even concepts that we don't have a word for within a language, and it limits our ability to talk about it. Like one of my favorite things that I wish English had, but doesn't, but German does, is like there's a term, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but it basically means like a face in need of a fist. I usually think of that when I look at like Tucker Carlson. And I'm kidding about that, by the way. Nobody punched Tucker Carlson. But like, it's difficult to have that concept within to have certain concepts. So the English language conspires to make discussions like this difficult, which is partially, I think, by accident and maybe partially a little bit by design. So first off, can we refer to somebody explicitly hating someone as bigotry for who they are for bad reasons? And that bigotry could be based on race, but it isn't racism in the way that like people are racist against Black people necessarily, just when we're talking about like large systems of power. Is that okay?
I consider bigotry based on race to be racism, but I'm happy to work with your definitions, just because I don't want us to argue semantics, because we understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, because when you're dealing with like you're not a bad actor, but when you're dealing with bad actors within this, a lot of people will play like a Mott and Bailey fallacy, where what they'll do is they will try to move around and change the definition of race or racism based upon what's most convenient for their argument. And let's try to avoid that. First off, yes, I will acknowledge that anti-white bigotry exists. I don't necessarily think that like hashtag waiting for white genocide is necessarily it's not really, that's not really a hashtag, but something like that. That's not really a call for white genocide. That's people making fun of Nazis who think that like Nazis think that like if you show an interracial couple in a TV commercial, that's white genocide. Which is simply not the case. But, again, Poe's law. There may be some nutso woke scold out there that actually does hate white people and takes that stuff seriously. But one of the things that I've learned, because I've dealt a lot with the radical left, is I was very active in Occupy Wall Street. Since then, you know, I covered the movement, I covered trials in the movement. And when you deal with people on the radical left, a lot of the time, and this is, I'm not talking about Democrats, I'm talking about communists and anarchists and other forms of socialists, you get a lot of hyperbole in the way that they talk, and they don't necessarily mean what they're literally saying. So like, I might be sitting there on Facebook, for instance, and see a nasty story about some guy being a total jackass. And I type sarcastically #kill all men underneath it. Not because I want to kill all men, because I'm a dude, but just like, oh, this frustrates me so much. So what happens is things that appear as hate speech, when targeted in different directions, may simply be somebody making a joke or making some sort of a reference or something. You see it when people get accused of racism and they say, I was kidding or whatever. Now, you're right in that people do not respond to these sorts of attacks against white people in the way that they do against minorities. But that's for actually a very, very good reason. And it's because these attacks, even when they are seriously said, like I remember I was walking down the street, I live in Harlem, and an old black lady, I walked by her and I heard her mutter under her breath, "They're cave dwellers." And she was having this like racist or bigoted speech with herself about how terrible white people were. And, you know, I don't know what was going on in her life. I don't know why she was frustrated like that. But, you know, and it made me feel a little bit, because essentially what she was doing was she was dehumanizing me and people that looked like me. But no one is going to take that and hurt me because she said it. However, there is this thing called pseudo-speciation. And this is that humans, we have a block in our minds, a psychological block that prevents us from essentially, you don't eat your own kind. So if you've got people that want to hurt someone or rape someone or steal from someone, what they have to do first is convince themselves, unless they're a total sociopath, that that other person isn't human. And one of the ways that they do it is through language. Remember when I talked in my opening statement about, you know, idiots, robots, or animals? And if you look at like white nationalists and you look at like virulent misogynists and people, they use this very aggressive language, like what is it? Incels. They call women femoids. That is pseudo-speciation. Now, if you try to pseudo-speciate a white guy like myself, you're going to have a really hard time convincing people that I'm not human, because as my identity is like at the top of the identity social pyramid, at least as far as like race is concerned, and gender and sex and orientation is concerned. But what happens is the further you go down that pyramid, the more vulnerable a situation a person is actually in, and the easier it is to erode those feelings of compassion. So, you know, you get a bunch of people, they start saying racial slurs over and over again, they repeat it, that compassion gets eroded and eroded and eroded and broken down until people who maybe already want to do some form of violence for whatever reason decides, hey, it's okay. So the huge overreaction or seeming overreaction, the double standard that you see, is because hate speech represents a legitimate physical threat to the people that it targets. Whereas hate speech against white people, even if it is super hateful and awful, is not going to have the same kind of effect. It's just going to be someone being mean to us for a bad reason. For the most part, we can let it roll off our backs. Does that make sense?
Well, I agree that it's not as bad. But what I don't agree is that it needs to be that bad for it to be institutional racism, right? I agree that as the world we're living in today, it's not, we're very unlikely to, well, actually, I might, somebody's going to play this like 1 month from now, somebody's going to kill a white person and we're like, Armin, what the hell did you see? Yeah. But it doesn't exist. The violence, the dehumanization, the consequences is not at all the same level, at least not in the United States. I mean, the de facto thing that you're mentioning about white people as being the de facto. That's only in white majority countries, just to be fair. But
well,
but you're
I
right.
mean, not necessarily. I do agree with you for the most part on that, but also like take China, for instance. China is not a white majority country, but if I'm not mistaken, like in China, if you're white, you can be hired just to be a white person and hang out somewhere. Like they will hire white people just to hang out in like Chinese clubs, so people go to that club because they think rich white people are going to be there.
Yeah. I mean, obsession with white people is I've seen that in many places, in Philippines, in Iran, in China. That is, to be fair, that's also extremely racist and disgusting. But so what I'm based on the definition that I was working with, but when it comes to institutional racism, it doesn't say that this is systemic if it leads to violence. It's systemic if it involves dehumanization. Okay. And also,
wouldn't it be systemic if it involves a system?
Yes. So what I consider people being explicitly bigoted towards white people, that's not what I consider systemic racism. That's explicit form of racism. Okay. Mm-hmm. The reaction to it, to me, suggests a systemic form of racism. The double standard, like even if we remove so you're saying it's justified because it doesn't really lead to violence or dehumanization.
I wouldn't say it's justified. I think it's still shitty. Like shitty. It's still
just to be sure this kind of gets just to be sure that Armin had a chance to finish that thought. Unless
no, I'm happy to be interrupted like this. It's good.
Yeah. Okay. No. I'll just so this kind of goes down to my own personal philosophy, and I'm a Buddhist with Soka Gakkai. And one of the reasons that I do these debates is because the idea of confronting slanderers of the Lotus Sutra, by the way, I'm not calling you that, the idea, which is another way of saying attacking the ideas of those who try to dehumanize other people and say that someone is inherently less than another is something that is part of my Buddhist practice. It's something that I'm very devoted to. And I would say, even if you're doing it as a joke, putting, hashtag kill all men, that is a very minor slander of the Lotus Sutra, because even if you don't intend it to be a horrible thing to dehumanize people, someone's going to take it seriously, especially if it's replicated en masse. There's always that idiot who takes things a little too far beyond what somebody intends when they put something out into the world. So right. I think, for instance, Twitter can be a very toxic environment. But let me just see if I'm getting you correctly. What you're saying essentially is because Twitter is a toxic environment and people are not sufficiently critical of the toxic environment that is Twitter, systemic racism against white people exists. Is that the argument, or am I missing something?
I'll give you a more specific example right after I mention this. First of all, I do have to say that I've seen some people saying that seriously. Again, it's not
I don't doubt it.
Okay. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that you I'm grateful that you do label that as something vile and disgusting. But the thing is that, given that you agree with me that it's something vile and disgusting, even before it gets to the point of violence or dehumanization, what I've noticed is that within the United States, just saying what you just said can get organizations into trouble. Even calling it out and saying that this is not okay, right, could get giant corporations into trouble. Just even acknowledging that. Like, for example, I don't, what was his name? Nick Cannon, right? Do you see his? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Nick Cannon. The name is vaguely ringing a bell. I'm not sure. So who's this guy?
So he just recently had an interview. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Yeah, I think. Let me make sure. So he just recently had an interview. This is just one example. Okay, I could give you a lot of examples. Okay, he just recently had an interview talking about white people and Jews, and these are like the Black Israelites. He believes in their, right? But again, so what the things that he was saying in the interview was this is not system. What he was saying was not systemic racism, okay? Because that's an example of explicit racism. He was being intentionally saying vile things, discussing things against Jewish people and against white people. Okay, go watch that interview because it is dehumanizing actually. All right, because he was comparing white people to animals, to being barbaric, to being. He was saying that melanin is what gives you a soul. Melanin is a source of compassion, source of intellect, source of civilization.
So wait, is this guy a Black Israelite, or was he just giving an example?
Wait, actually, is he Black Israelite? No, sorry, he's like, oh yeah, Black Israelite, and he also, yes, no, he. I'm not sure if he officially considered himself as part of that organization, but he seems to be saying a lot of things that they say, and also a lot of things that Nation of Islam seems to be saying as well, right? So I think they pick these. A lot of people don't. I'm not sure exactly about him, so somebody maybe in the live chat could correct me. But I've noticed a lot of people that are not officially part of any of these organizations, they borrow a lot of their narratives, right?
Now, what I want to point out really quickly before we go, and I'll let you get back to it.
Okay.
What you're describing is bigotry, which is not necessarily evidence of systemic racism.
That's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying what he was saying is systemic racism. I think what I'm going to point is the reaction to it. Okay, because if you watch that interview, and it's a long interview, and it's so funny, man. Like you will have a. But he goes into the way that he described, and you have to see the level of support that this narrative gets among this community. I mean, again, there's
and what is this the Black Israelites or the Nation of Islam, or what's the
both, and a whole bunch of other. So there's a small circle of these people that associate with these groups, and then there's a larger group of people that believe a lot of their narratives and borrow it and endorse it without them considering themselves as part of these groups. Okay, they are big. They are a small percentage, but again, a small percentage of a big number gives you a large enough number of people to have very problematic views. But again, none of these views are examples of systemic racism. These are, to me, these are all definitions.
Yeah, these organizations don't have any systemic power. They're just
yes, but again, he was okay. So they don't. But hold on, let me see where Nick Conan was fired from. He was fired. Okay, he was fired by Viacom. Viacom is a big enough organization with institutional power, right? But if you look at the statement from Viacom, and the reason why he was fired was the parts that he talked about Jewish people, not anything, not the length, all the stuff that he said about white people. Comparing it, saying that they're not even human, saying that they don't have a soul, saying that they don't have compassion because their skin is white. None of that was reason enough for his firing. Okay, and again, I think getting fired for his anti-Semitic views was justified, right? I'm not just saying that people should be less react. There shouldn't be a reaction to people being anti-Semitic. Again, okay, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences of your speech, right? But what I'm saying is that he should have also gotten fired if he didn't say any of the anti-Semitic parts and had all the vile things that he said about white people. That should have got him fired as well. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. But right. What I'm going to point out is just because they gave that as their official reason does not mean the other stuff didn't play into it. Viacom was probably just covering their asses, because if, for instance, they had fired him for the white stuff, that could be misinterpreted by certain communities and activists as being anti-Black, essentially, even though they're not. But what they're doing is they're saying, okay, we can fire him for this stuff he said about Jews because nobody can argue with us that is 100% racist. But Nazis will argue with them. But
does that not show to you that there's a level of acceptance of being able to say vile? I mean, this is just one example.
I mean, it's not a level of. I would say it's not a level of acceptance. It's a level of plausible deniability. So, again, the big problem with a lot of this is people lie. You go up to Richard Spencer, you ask him if he's a hateful person, he'll say no. People lie about who they are. They lie to themselves, and they lie about their motivations for a variety of reasons. So whenever you're dealing with something that's really thorny, like this issue of race, you have to deal not just with the people who tell the truth, but also the people who are bad actors. So for instance, when that "it's okay to be white" thing was hashtag, no one was saying it wasn't okay to be white, but literal neo-Nazis on 4chan put that forth with the hopes that they could use that to push their neo-Nazi ideology. And so you will see neo-Nazi accounts tweeting, "it's okay to be white." And then people will try to call that out, and they'll say, "No, I'm just saying it's okay to be white. Everything's fine." So, you have to deal with bad actors. And I think Viacom, being a huge corporation that could be targeted by a lot of lawsuits, has to be extremely careful with corporate PR culture. So what they are going to officially fire someone for and tell everyone we're firing them for this reason may not be the whole of what they are taking into account.
But doesn't that prove my point? The fact that it would be a political nightmare for them to come out and say...
I don't think it would be a political nightmare. I just think it would be a little more risky.
Okay, I mean, I disagree, but let's even go with that. The fact that it's political risky to come out and say for an organization that powerful, for it to be risky to come out and say, "Oh yeah, we don't tolerate I would say anti-white racism, but I'll go with your words. We don't tolerate anti-white bigotry, even if it's not in this organization, and that's why we're letting you go." The fact that you will get in trouble for that, the fact that you're going to get a shitload of, that should go without saying.
It wouldn't necessarily be that they'd get in trouble for that. So let's say they do this. Let's say they say this. Because what happens is that when somebody says something, people infer from what they're saying. It's like, what are they not saying? So say Viacom looks at that thing and they say, "We're firing him for his anti-white statements," right? And they put that out in their press release. First of all, people will say, "Whoa, he said anti-Jewish stuff. What about the Jews?" And then other people will look at that and say, "Okay, well, what's the percentage of the people who work there? How many Black people do they employ? What are their salaries? What's going on here?" So people will dig into that and attack them based upon the perception that they are hiding something. Or at least that would be my understanding of it, which would be why the corporate PR culture would be very careful. Now, is this right? In a certain sense, yes, and in a certain sense, no. In the sense, no, in that it's not fair because it is a double standard. And if we could take everything at face value, you should be able to fire someone for anti-white. But also in the sense of no, because again, there is not a immediate threat to white people of not being able to find jobs or being overly targeted.
Do you agree that somebody coming out and saying white people are like animals, white people have no soul? I mean, nobody has a soul, but that's another topic. But white people specifically don't have a soul, and white people do not have compassion. They're barbaric, they're violent, and that's, if somebody just says that and says nothing about Jewish people, even if it doesn't lead to violence, this is already dehumanizing, but
I would say that guy would have been fired for what he said for white people. They just would have worded the,
so if it was shown to you that if somebody loses their job because of something like that, there would be a lot of pressure on an organization that does carry out something like that, and there's a lot of pressure not to take action against somebody that is only bigoted against white people and not against any other group of people. If you see that it's easy for big institutions and politicians and media to call out bigotry that is just bigotry, not leading to violence against Black people or Jewish people. I mean, let's just forget Black people. Let's put aside because I agree with you. That has bigger consequences, right? But if you just the bigotry against white people, even calling it out, even acknowledging it, even saying, even coming out and saying that the bigotry against white people is a thing, it's real, gets you demonize and people call you out as racist for even saying that. People remove you from your their social circles. People, I mean, I don't know, again, because of all of what I've seen has not been collected in a scientific way that could, that I could present in the data. This is just based on my experience and the things I've seen. But this kind of attitude is widespread. I think, and because it's my personal experience and it's not collected scientifically, I'm happy to be proven wrong. But if it was shown for this to be the case, wouldn't that be an example of some form of systemic? I don't know. So you don't like say racism, systemic bigotry?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's systemic. I mean, what you've got there is you've got a corporation that's concerned with profits primarily, and it's looking to protect its profits, and that's why it's getting rid of these people. It's not moral outrage over the treatment of Jews or the treatment of white people that's prompting Viacom's behavior. It's they want to make sure that their profits stay intact and that the people who invest get a higher return on investment and that their owners and shareholders are happy.
But that's true for all form of systemic racism. Institution like for-profit companies always act with the intentions of maximizing profit.
Yeah, and go back to well, actually not always, because sometimes they will act counter to profit if they are sufficiently racist. I mean, you saw that in the Jim Crow South.
That would be true if there's explicit form of racism, intentional form of racism, right? But the systemic racism that is happening without explicit form of racism could, if it's happening within private institutions, private organizations, is probably as a result of go on.
I mean, even implicit racism can still cause someone to act in a way that is counter to profits. A great example, honestly, is what we learned with the Black Panther movie, because for years and years, people didn't want to see movies with Black superheroes in them, or that's what Hollywood believed and kept saying. The same thing with the Wonder Woman movie. We can't see a movie that's starring a woman. Nobody will want to watch it. Nobody wants this. And what we found with Wonder Woman and Black Panther, there's a huge market for this.
So the intention is profit.
Their intention, their conscious intention is profit, but their conscious attention towards profit is influenced by systemic or by implicit racism and sexism. So I think what we're doing, by the way, is there's a bit of a conflation between implicit and systemic. Systemic contains both explicit and implicit types because it relates to systems and how systems interact with people, whereas implicit is unconscious bias towards a person for bad reasons, and explicit conscious bigotry is explicit bias.
The way I say it, there's three forms. There's explicit form of racism, implicit form of racism, and racism by outcome. And the systemic form of racism is the last two. Is a mix of the last two. That's the way I saw it. But I'm happy to change my definitions.
Have you ever read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn?
No.
I would highly recommend you check it out, because they do the fourth chapter, I believe, and it's online for free. You can see it at historyasaweapon.com, but it's called Drawing the Color Line. And it actually goes into, as I said, the United States' own original sin. That's my term, not his, but I stole it from the Bible, so whatever. Or I stole it from Catholics. So, but
this is why, by the way, why it's giving us as an atheist organization an excuse to go after all of this, because it's becoming so much like a religion. But go on.
I mean, no, you know what? I got to tell you, I do think that there is a lot of religious or culturally religious behavior in a lot of kind of the woke scold kind of things. I think you are correct in latching on to that. Confessing your sins, penance, like there's a
sins
lot
of the father being the sins of the son.
Yeah. Now, I don't think that that's necessarily 100% tied to religion. I think a part of that is human culture. And that'd be a great debate in and of itself to just go into that and to see where these kinds of antisocial tendencies come from. But what the reason why I brought that up is it talks about the creation of racism and racist attitudes at the beginning of the foundation of the United States. Because originally, when they brought both black and white people over, they were not brought over as slaves. They were brought over as indentured servants. And they seemed on the contract that to be equal parties with the people indenturing them. Now, in reality, no, that was just the contract. And these people were basically slaves. Either they'd been captured or wound up in debt. But what happened was that after the first few joint revolts, where the black people and white people joined together and had rebellions against the landowners that owned them, suddenly they passed explicit laws that were made to prevent that punished more any kind of
where are we getting with this? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, because this is a form of this, like this is anti-black stuff.
I'm pointing out the origin of racism, the socioeconomic origin of the American form of racism, of systemic racism in American history.
I think we agree on that, and I also would agree with you if you want to say that the effects of that even continues till today. Like, for example, I agree with generational poverty. I agree that Jim Crow and slavery, is the effects of it is not erased, and
sure. Well, but my point in bringing it up, and seriously, reads in. It's really good. Like he's not the best writer in the world, but it's a good book. The reason I'm bringing it up is that both the explicit and the implicit attitudes were tied together from the very beginning,
right.
and one grows from the other. So yeah, I don't think you can separate them. Is what
I'm categorizing them. I'm not separating them. Obviously, the more explicit form of racism do you have, the even wider the systemic form of racism is going to be. One leads to another. In fact, what explicit form of racism, if it's there for a long time, even once you get rid of it, it's the systemic racism that was the systemic form of racism that lingers on after that, is as a direct result of the explicit form of racism being part of a society and accepted, right?
Sure.
And that's why I also think that the explicit form of racism that exists against white people, given that it's becoming normalized and accepted, that has or will lead into systemic form of racism. That's what I think. But one thing I want to ask is, what do you think about people like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi in books like Anti-Racism and White Fragility? Like, do you think, like, I don't know how much you know about their narratives, but do you think like the idea of white fragility is like, and the things that Robin DiAngelo, for example, says, is that a bigoted way of just talking about white people?
I mean, I haven't read her book, so I don't know. So what I would say about white fragility is I would need data on that. Now, I have seen white people go to absolute pieces whenever they get taught, whenever somebody talks about
I've seen all kinds of
racism
people
with them. Yeah. Because it's an emotionally charged issue. So there may be some sort of fragility, but you would need to demonstrate that with sociological data. And I haven't seen any of the data.
She's not interested in data because she says she thinks data and science is white people tools to oppress minorities. And I hope you see how ridiculous that is. And she doesn't even suggest that. She outright says it. Okay. And she also is okay. She also mentions that she's completely okay with generalizing white people, and just, talking about them collectively rather than individually. I mean, do you agree that those are? I get this is not an example of systemic racism, but I think this is like.
Am I mad at Robin DiAngelo? Is that what you're asking me?
No, not personally. Like, I think, do you consider talking about a whole group of people the way Robin DiAngelo does? Do you consider that? I mean, I call it explicit racism, but would you consider that bigotry?
I would have to see how she actually talks about them. Like I said, I haven't read the book. What I would say is, at the very least, if you're heavily generalizing about an entire group of people without data, you're behaving irresponsibly. I would say that's an irresponsible statement without data to back it up.
So let me tell you, for example, another example for why I might think that's systemic racism against white people. And again, I understand that the way your definition is different than mine, but I want you to see where I'm coming from. given that what I see, what people like Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo are saying, given that I consider that explicit form of racism, intentional, individual
do you have a direct quote from them, by the way, just so I can respond to this?
I should have prepared that.
If you don't have one, you can send it to me later.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
But given that I consider, I mean, she comes out and says that she's okay with generalizing white people. Like she says that in as clear as it could be, right? And she considers racism to be a white thing, right? White people are racist.
And this is the author, and this is the author of the
Fragility.
White Fragility.
Right.
You'll notice something very important about that. Oh, okay.
Let me make a point though. What she says to me is not an example of systemic racism. What is an example of systemic racism is that she's now her book is the #1 bestseller when it comes to race issues in the United States. What suggests to me that anti-white racism is systemic is now her book and her dogma and her methodology is now treated as gospel in diversity training and anti-racism in corporate America, in universities, in many universities, in government institutions, and in
do you have any data
media.
To back that up?
But
besides the book sales, do you have any data to back that up?
Well, I can send that to you as well. But
sure.
The thing is that I didn't say in. So here's the thing: it's really easy to show that it's being used as the go-to doctrine methodology for anti-racism training,
because it's selling well.
No, it's being used. Okay, I will send that to you. Okay. It's being used heavily. I'm not saying everywhere. I'm not saying all I have to show is that it's being used a lot, not that it's being used by majority of corporation, not that it's being used everywhere, okay? But it's being used a lot. It is the #1. Her book, her and Ibram Kendi are the top 2 leading figures when it comes to and again, it's what you said. It's a profit motive, right?
Yeah, it's corporate PR.
Yeah, it's corporate PR. Like these organizations. They just go look at the top sellers, the people that other people are seeing as authority. They hire them. They're like, look, we're doing something about it. Can you please shut the fuck up and not come after us, right? So, but unfortunately it is spreading. And that's the treatment of corporate America and universities. I mean, again, what I have as also a lot of stories and example. And again, this is not what I also mentioned is that I'm happy to be proven wrong with data, but I have a lot of anecdotes of students in universities that are this is being taught to them in philosophy classes, in sociology classes, in diversity, in classes that is these books don't even belong to, in people that are learning about education, in classes that people are learning about how to teach kids. Apparently they have to learn about
so how many students are you hearing this from exactly?
Well, I mean, a lot. I don't know how I can send you, like, again, these are all, it doesn't really.
Yeah, because it sounds like anecdotal data. Now,
no, I agree with you that it's anecdotal. Mm-hmm. That's why what I say, I think anti-white racism is systemic in the United States. I don't think, I don't even treat that as a theory. I treat it as a hypothesis, because I've only seen enough anecdotes to think that this should be considered seriously. Not that not that it's been proven that this is a widespread thing, right?
So can I give you a quick example of systemic racism as it plays into the United States against Black people, just really quickly so we can see?
Actually, can I suggest that, because if you're going to say to me that systemic racism against Black people is a lot worse, I don't think we're going to have disagreement there.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's worse. I'm saying
or more widespread.
Yeah, or even more widespread. I mean, I think it is worse and more widespread if we are to assume that that systemic racism takes place. But I mean, again, term for systemic racism was created specifically to deal with how systems interact with minorities. So if it's not sufficiently like the systemic racism that interacts with minorities, should we even call it systemic racism, or should we come up with
I'm just
some
working
new term
with the
for it?
definition that I have. The definition that I have is a form of racism that is embedded as normal practice within society or an organization. The interesting thing is that it doesn't even say organizations. Like you have to have an organization.
Right.
So I think it's easy to prove what I'm saying, I think.
Well, I think the problem is one, you're going with a dictionary definition, and dictionaries only use words and how they are used in common parlance. And you're using a dictionary definition to argue essentially with academics using a technical definition.
I'm happy to be saying that systemic racism is not a thing if we go with a definition that doesn't show that, like, if you say, oh, I'm working with this definition, and based on this definition, systemic racism against white people is not a thing, I would be like, yep, you're right. Based on that definition, systemic racism against white people is not a thing. All I'm saying is, based on this definition, which I'm happy not to use if you don't like, all I'm saying is that based on this definition that I'm working with, systemic racism against white people is a thing.
I mean, I would say that definition, at least in the way that you're talking about it and describing it, is insufficient, because it is so different in practice than what the people who created the term systemic racism meant when they created it. So like a good example would be Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray lived in Baltimore, and he was directly affected by Jim Crow and redlining. Now, he lived after it. He was, during our lifetimes, I think he was actually younger than me. But he was raised because of redlining, because people would not get, and the government would not give home loans to Black families. He was raised in illegal tenement housing that had lead paint on the walls. He grew up as a baby ingesting lead paint. The lead paint damaged his mind and stunted his development. And this was proven in court. It did happen. He won a lawsuit about it and then was later tricked out of his money by a corporation that tricked him into trading away his whole settlement for like a small lump sum that was spent very quickly. Freddie Gray, the ingestion of lead damages your ability to think critically. It increases your aggression. And when he was targeted by the Baltimore Police Department, he, I believe, ran. And because he ran, they tackled him. They found a small knife on him, and they took him for a rough ride in their van and drove the van around basically doing donuts with him not buckled in, and it severed his spine and killed him. Now that's an example of systemic racism, and it wasn't even necessarily explicit systemic racism from those officers. They might have thought, oh, this is just a jerk and we're going to give him a tough time. But you can see how all of those factors contributed to this perfect storm that killed this human being after making his life miserable.
I mean, if you want to give me examples of systemic racism against Black people being a real thing,
it's not that it's a real thing. It's that it's so different from what you're describing that I don't think it's appropriate to use the same term. I think what you're describing is bad, but I think it should have a different term.
Okay, but if maybe you're right. Okay, and I'm happy to be saying like maybe we should have come up with a different definition than here. But if that was a definition that we were using, would you then say that systemic racism based on that definition against white people is the real thing?
I mean, I'd be careful saying systemic, because then someone might misinterpret me. But what I might say is, let's call it, just for the sake of argument right here. I know we're doing a debate here, but just for the sake of argument in this one, what if we called it like toxic woke scold culture? Or we called it toxic PR culture, toxic corporate PR culture. I would say, yeah, that sucks and somebody should do something about it.
Okay, great.
I
don't mind if it's using different words, as long as we can acknowledge that it's toxic and having to deal with it. I think I would be happy with that.
Yeah. Well, again, and I'm fine with it, because what I'm mostly concerned about is I don't want to see the struggles of minority people kind of washed out and replaced with the struggles that white people necessarily have to deal with that are bad, but not the same thing.
Actually, and that's a very important concern. And one thing I have to acknowledge is that a lot of times people use stuff that I'm trying to say as a way to dismiss the racism that exists against Black people, and it would be irresponsible of me that to not clarify that every time I try to mention the racism that exists against white people. Within that same content, I have to be careful to mention that other forms of racism are real and a bigger problem. Not because, like, again, it's unfortunate that I have to do that, because it's okay. I think it should be okay for some people to be focusing on a problem without having to acknowledge other problems that exist. But given how misused how common it is for people to misuse that form of narrative to dismiss the racism against Black people.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we are going to try to move into the Q&A.
That's my last. I just want to quickly say this: I think as content creators, we are responsible for our audience. We cannot say that I didn't mean to say this. People just took my narrative and use it for own propaganda. I think if as content creators, if we are aware that people are constantly misusing our points, then it is the responsible thing to do is to clarify that you do not stand with those people, right? I think Just wanted to point that out. But yeah,
really quickly before we move into it, I just wanted to say I think we just actually came to an understanding. The internet works. So thank you, dude, and I really appreciate this discussion. I'm excited to do the Q&A. Yeah, you kind of rock. So I'm glad.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any closing statements that they want to make before we move into questions?
No, I'm okay.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to say something really quickly, and this is just because when I was doing my research on you, I think you talked a little bit and you used kind of the term like the regressive left. Mm-hmm. And I think what we just hit on right here is why I think the smarter ones on the regressive left may be a little less keen to criticize Islam. Because like if I'm coming from my own perspective, I live in New York City. There was a cab driver in New York that came in and a guy had come back from Afghanistan and he asked the cab driver if the cab driver was Muslim. He responded like Assalamu alaikum or Allah Akbar or whatever they say. And the guy slit his throat. And I always think of that when I am going to say something about some other community of people. So I think in the same reason that I'm a little careful with racist stuff, I think some people on the left, the smarter ones, not the dumber ones, are probably thinking something like that, where they don't want their words to be used by bad actors further on down the line. And some are just idiots. But I think that might be the core of the regressive left issue that some people have.
I think it's completely fair, even if that was not the issue, for some people to want to focus on certain ideas. Like if some people want to focus on Christianity and not criticize Islam, some people want to focus on Islam and not focus on Christianity. Some people want to focus on religion as a whole and criticize all of that together. But my problem is not the people who say like, you know what, I don't know what the consequences of me criticizing Islam would be. I don't know. You guys could do that. I'm going to focus on Christianity. I don't have any issues with that, right? I have an issue with people that, criticize Christianity but make excuses for Islam. Mm-hmm. Go out of their way and saying, "Oh, Islam is not that bad. Islam is pro-woman. Islam is this and that." And I'm like, no, this is worse. Like, for example, even if you go, like some people saying like, "Oh, how could you be a feminist if you're not speaking about women in, I don't know, the Middle East?" I'm like, well, maybe because they want to focus on women at a certain place.
Clean
it's
your
okay.
own backyard.
or even like, you're just passionate about a certain cause and you want to focus. It's okay to focus. My issue is not with people that do not speak about women in other places. My issue is people who are fighting for women's rights in some places, but they're making excuses for anti-women policies and ideas in other places. If you do that, that's when I go after people and call them regressive leftists. If they
that's awesome and very, very reasonable. So I applaud you on that.
Gotcha.
Okay, can we move into
we can probably move into the Q&A. So thank you so much, gentlemen. And I want to mention, folks, if you had not seen it, both, or in fact, all three of our guests are linked in the description. So if you'd like to hear more from them, you totally can, whether that be Brenton, Armin, or Kay. So excited and reading slightly out of order because I specifically asked Kay if I could read this particular super chat. Movie theory. Thank you. That's right. That's right, Brenton. Okay.
Movie theory, oh boy.
Brandon, it's nice your wife's boyfriend let you debate tonight. It never gets old.
I gotta say, I heard that before. My wife does not have a boyfriend. I'd be okay with it if she did, if I liked him or something. What's also interesting is like, I don't know, like, that's kind of almost a hot thought if you kind of have like if you're into like S&M and stuff. And I won't rule on whether I'm into that or not, but yeah.
Okay, it's time to go to the next one. We've heard enough. Thank you. Go ahead, Kay.
I have an actual legitimate question that does not regard Brenton's wife or her boyfriend. Sunflower asks, if someone on Call of Duty hears an accent in their opponent's voice and wants to insult or offend their opponent, do they use racial or religious slurs? Is that person a racist, and should they be canceled?
Armin, do you want to take that one, or should I?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Can you?
I believe that she's asking if, on Call of Duty, if someone hears an accent in the voice of the opponent and wants to insult them, as so often you see.
I think it depends on the intention. If the intention is to demean a whole group of people, then it's racist. Again, it's really hard to read people's mind. But if somebody is using that as an insult the same way that they would use against it, I mean, they're probably just not a very nice person, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's just normal in gaming community. I'm not very involved in that. But I think if you see it as racist, if it's used against minorities, but you don't see it as racist if it's used against everyone else, then you're being a bit biased unless you somehow know the intentions of the person doing it.
Yeah, I'm going to come at that from another direction. I'm going to say intent is completely irrelevant. In just the same way as if someone steals my wallet, I don't actually care if deep down in their heart they consider themselves a thief and thought that I just want my wallet back. So it's someone doing that, someone hears something in their voice and decides to use a racial slur to make somebody mad. Yeah, they did a racist thing. I don't know if they are a racist, but they should be corrected for doing the racist thing because that's an awful thing to do. And even if they don't intend offense, if they don't intend to hurt somebody, it's like throwing a freaking grenade. Like if somebody uses like the R word to call someone stupid, just call them stupid, because you don't need to throw a bunch of people with disabilities under a bus to call them stupid. Don't hurt other people just because you're mad at someone else. It's irresponsible behavior.
Gotcha. We must keep moving just because we have a number of questions. Okay. I hate to do that to you guys, but just to try to get through as many as we can. Padme the cat. So I'll start from the bottom of the list, Kay, and you keep going from the top of the list, and we'll meet in the middle. So Padme, thank you for your question, said, the worst part of saying, quote, white, unquote, is that white people are totally more light orange or peach or something. Snow is white. Snow White is light orange.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead. Kay.
In my comic Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, by the way, Snow White is Chinese.
That is really progressive. I like that. So, go ahead,
I don't know if that was a question or do we need to respond to that?
I think it was like a silly super chat.
I mean, black people are not black either, so I don't know. And brown people are not brown. Yellow people are not yellow, so I don't know.
So all of this is stupid.
All right. Some guy says, if people respond more negatively to anti-black compared to anti-white bigotry, doesn't that prove society is systematically racist against whites?
No, we talked about that. There's a good logical reason for them to respond more negatively against anti-black bigotry than anti-white bigotry, because anti-black bigotry can get people killed. There's a much larger and more present threat when bigotry is directed at minorities as opposed to when it's directed at the majority, because the majority has not been systematically disenfranchised and disempowered and dehumanized.
Right. So, I somewhat agree that if you see the consequences of one action being bigger than the other one, then you fight it stronger. So the imbalance doesn't prove to me that there's a systemic racism. The fact that calling one of them out at all could get you in trouble. And, even if it's not as bad, the fact that it is bad is not motivating institutions to go after it as something that is not acceptable. Just the outright denial of it, or acting like it's not even there, that to me suggests that there might be systemic racism out there. The imbalance of the fact that they're not the same, I think that Brenton is right, that is justified.
Next up, thank you for your question from Castizo, who says, question for the dude with the Hitler stash. Is systemic racism against whites possible in Japan?
Is it so I'm going to assume, because I'm the only one with a mustache, but like Hitler's mustache is this. I have like a full mustache. It gets a little darker underneath my nose, but I think it's just because the sun doesn't hit it. Is it possible? Is anti-white possible? We talked about this like in China. I mean, maybe it's possible. In fact, actually, I think Japan is pretty xenophobic. I just don't know if systemically they are biased against whites. I have a friend who lives in Japan and started a Food Not Bombs chapter over there, and he never shuts up about it, but that's cool because Food Not Bombs is cool and living in Japan is cool. And he has mentioned that he has experienced some hostility, some bigotry based upon him being white and married to a Japanese woman and being a gaijin. But I would have to know more about the like actual institutional structure of Japanese society if I can say that that's systemic anti-white racism or if it's just bigotry.
Well, I mean, if the question is if it's possible, then obviously it's possible. Whether or not they exist, I don't know. I haven't. Yeah. But I agree with Brenton that I don't know either. I have to actually see. A lot of people in the live chat are angry that I didn't push back harder against you. I'm saying that I'm a terrible white advocate. And people are saying, why am I even defending white people if I'm not white myself? I would like...
Watch it. They might be Nazis. I'm not kidding. They literally might be Nazis.
It's true that some could be. Kay, I think we just lost Kay. Did we lose you, Kay?
Yeah, we lost.
Oh no, bring her back. I like her.
I think she'll be back any moment.
She has absolutely phenomenal hair.
Yes, I noticed that as well.
But I was going to say, Brenton,
is that a gamer? That's a gamer girl haircut, isn't it?
I see. I grew up doing like the goth scene, so like that undershave. That's like that's like an industrial haircut. But yeah, what were you saying, James?
We'll in the meantime, I will. Oh, that's right. I'm going to put the banner for the next week. Milo Yiannopoulos and Jangles debate. Boy, will be debating. Perhaps at some point we'll have. Who knows? It could be Brenton at some point, depending on if there will be a topic. It definitely
could be. If there's a topic, yeah, I'd be interested.
Wait, and, are we allowed to take this debate and post it on the ACES? Can I post this on the ACES?
No, yeah, dude.
100%, totally. You can. Yes.
Okay. I will link back here. Okay, great.
Yeah. If you can link my channel as well, I'd love that.
Thanks. I will absolutely. Definitely. And let's see. 2 seconds.
Kay is back.
Changing.
We were praising your haircut.
We do have. Let's see here.
We were being extremely sexist by talking about how you look.
Next, let's see.
I don't know if that's sexist because a haircut is a choice. You know, it's like if you talk about like the way a person looks that they can't control. I feel like that's where it really gets into being sexist.
We were complimenting your haircut. That's what we were doing.
Well, thank you guys. My internet just decided to kick me out for no reason.
But to be fair, you have really crap audio. Just to balance that out.
It's a work in progress, but
don't insult someone's audio. I got my audio insulted. I went and bought a better mic because it hurt my feelings.
Our dearest friend Brenton did make a point that it is true. We do, Armin. I would keep in mind that some of these people in the chat would like more. It's true. I'm not saying all. But there might be one or two out there that might want more neo-Nazi types defending, you could say white people in this group. But one thing I was going to bring up really quick,
neo-Nazis, get the hell away from whiteness and white people. Like, we don't want your help. We don't need your help. Go away. All you're doing is embarrassing everyone else.
Something that's really interesting is that, have you guys noticed that? I've noticed it more and more, that identity politics, I'm like seeing people who may perhaps be neo-Nazis using identity politics type arguments.
Of course, because that's all that is id poll.
When we
Wait,
hosted...
it was always identity politics. Nazism was always identity politics.
Oh,
from
I
the
didn't.
beginning.
Okay. Because, well, the way that I thought of it in terms of like the leftist use. So, for example, let me give you an example. We had Brenton debated Sargon, and people were triggered, and they were like, "There's no trans person in this debate," and I still have no apologies for it because we're happy to have trans people, but we don't require that. You know,
Right.
we don't. For us, it's like we'll have anybody, but we don't require they be there for certain topics. Now, the idea is when Vosh and Destiny, when they debated, nobody from the more left side gave me any trouble, but the neo-Nazi type people were like, "Why is it you have white people, Vosh and Destiny, defending black people?"
Okay, so to be honest, to be fair to them, they're trying to say like you guys are hypocrites because you claim to want minority voices and you're not bringing minority voices. But to counter that, they themselves seem to be hypocrites themselves because they like a lot of people responded to this debate saying like, why is a non-white person speaking on behalf of white people? So they themselves are exactly like the people who they criticize. I also want to mention to Brenton, by the way, one thing that I think you might appreciate is the fact that a lot of what I say has successfully changed the mind of a lot of what you call neo-Nazis, because
I believe
like
that.
for example, I make videos and content saying, white racism is systemic, and then a whole bunch of them get excited and come over, and then I say, well, it's not as bad as anti-black racism, right? So, and I also have like videos saying Islam is worse than Nazism, and they get excited and come over, and then I say like, well, Islam is bad because the main victims of Islam are Muslims. Most Muslims are great people because most Muslims are better than Islam, and the best way to fight Islam is to befriend Muslims. Demonizing Muslims, it does not achieve anything. Like so,
that's definitely true. I have a friend who was stationed in Afghanistan, like in the military, and like he pointed out that like they will play like jihadists will play Donald Trump speeches to recruit, like because demonizing Muslims in the West makes them then think that it makes them feel justified in attacking the West.
But what I'm saying is part of what I do is not to go after just the woke, I don't know, left, but also to go after a lot of these far right narratives by getting them excited into what we're saying, but then also exposing them to maybe looking at these things differently.
Well, you're doing something that's really important in that you are acknowledging their pain and their perception and their because too many people on the left will not acknowledge the kind of pain and oppression that some of the people on the right feel. And if you don't acknowledge what they're feeling, if you don't acknowledge where it's coming from, they won't believe you and they won't trust you. That's one of the reasons why in my opening statement I said 99% of white people are systemically oppressed. It's not on their race, but they're still systemically oppressed. So like there is truth in that. It's just they've been suckered by fascism and by bad actors to believe a stupid inverted version of the world, and they've been tricked into essentially joining what is a death cult. So thank you for getting a few people out of a death cult. That's really important. I mean that very seriously.
I hate to do this.
Okay,
we've got a lot of questions to get through still, and we're late in the game.
Go. Sorry.
Let's see, Kay, I think that yours might have been the next one.
All right, so Lily R.O. says, define far left. P.S. James is soy cool. So I don't know if she meant to call you so cool or if she was calling you soy boy. But
we are bringing the soy meme back, but okay, go ahead.
Define far left. So here, if you think about the political sector, and I really think that the like that XY, there's problems with it, but the sort of the XY graph from economic socialism to laissez-faire and authoritarian to libertarian is a really important way to think about it, because the right-left spectrum it's based on the French Revolution and like where people sat in the French Parliament. It doesn't really make sense with modern politics. But to say what I would consider to be the far left would be someone who advocates either classical anarchism, a version of classical anarchism, Marxism, or a form of non-Marxist socialism. So they have to be someone that wants to eliminate capitalism and attack the institution of private property in one way or another. If they do not do that, they are not on the far left. Now, there might be liberals in the Democratic Party who are left of conservatives, but I would really consider them more centrist. Or if you want to take Joe Biden and put Joe Biden on like the world thing, he's way, way far on the conservative side. And the Democratic Party is controlled by the most conservative elements of it, which is why they like spiked Bernie Sanders, who ironically, Bernie Sanders, if he were a European politician, wouldn't be saying anything controversial and would just be like smack dab as a centrist.
Gotcha.
Yeah, he's a capitalist. By the way, I would like to have you on our channel, Atheist Republic, to discuss some of these ideas like communism, anarchism. Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah,
guys, follow both of our channels in the description, because we're gonna have some exciting discussions after this.
Yeah, this will be fun because, like, yeah, I can talk about anarchism, communism. I can talk about Buddhism if you want to, because I'm both an atheist and religious. So,
yeah, nice. And we will move to the next one as iPhone Musings gives an unusual super chat. Says, I extend my hand in marriage to Kay. Very nice, Kay. Very popular already.
Unfortunately, I am already married.
Yeah. Oh no, you shouldn't tell them that. You should build a simp army online. This is Susanna is in our Atheist Republic CEO is in the live chat. She's building her own personal simp army. It's very effective. That's the best way. You have to hide that ring. You can build a large following. Yeah.
Yeah.
You could do
and I am also married, but I'm polyamorous.
Yeah,
so
you
might have a chance, simps. Like, you guys could simp me.
There's a boyfriend and a husband. Yeah.
Boyfriend, husband, girlfriend. I don't give a crap.
I hope my husband's not watching this.
Next up, Andrew Weber. Thank you.
I was talking to chat, not UK, but sure.
Andrew says, my deepest respects to Armin for having the courage to defend my people. You are a truly noble and honorable man.
Oh, well, okay. I just want to say that I do recommend not looking at white people as your people. I do suggest that, not dividing each other into tribes based on things that are not that meaningful. I mean, saying my people based on skin color to me is as interesting and valuable as saying my people based on your hair color, right? I think when it comes to my people, I think we should consider everybody that lives on this planet as our people. I think that would be a healthier way to go forward and look at everything.
I agree 100% with that. And also, like, white people, we really are not that similar. Like, there is a huge difference between like a freaking Scot and like somebody from Scandinavia, and they're even really close to each other.
I mean, come on, guys, we're all in this together. Like, we only have one planet to we really need to save this planet, and going about like dividing ourselves based on these, Yeah.
That's
but again,
let's acknowledge that he is still praising you. So
much.
No, I know. Am I coming off as ungrateful for a praise?
No, you're not. Okay. No, you're not. He's probably a Nazi.
So many different white people. Think of Brenton and how he different he is from all of us. So.
Yeah, and I'm like the whitest freaking white person out there. Like my freaking my great grandfather. Like I'm from the Caucasus Mountains, like or the Carpathian Mountains. Like my grandfather, like when that weirdo who invented whiteness was holding that skull of the Georgian that he thought was like super beautiful, that was probably my like great grandfather's skull or great grandmother's skull or whatever. So I like outrank all the other white people.
All right, my question is from Rodney Fallberg. He says, Brenton, powerful opening statement, but it's flawed. In order to live, animals have to hunt. In order to live, people have to work. Socialism contradicts nature itself. Have you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad or watched ALUX videos?
I have no idea what those two things are, but and I have heard this argument that life requires struggle, and that very much is true. We do have to work, and working is part of the essence of what it is to be a person. But what socialists take issue with, and especially libertarian socialists like myself, is not the fact that we have to work. It's the fact that we have to work for other people under conditions that those people set, and have no option to work for ourselves, no realistic option to work for ourselves. So, again, I don't have a problem with working. I actually love working, but I have a problem with working for a capitalist.
Gotcha. And I'm going to send over the last 3 super chats over to Kay right now, but I'm going to read the first one just to keep it moving. This person, let me just see if I can find their name. Very embarrassing. Turbo, thanks for your question, said, Brenton, racially based affirmative action targets ethnic minorities. It is, in a way, systematic racism against whites. Would you support class-based affirmative action, considering it would not discriminate against poor whites?
I would support class-based affirmative action, and we have class-based affirmative action, not well enough. But yeah, and in fact, it would because Black people are overrepresented in poverty conditions, that would actually raise up a lot of Black people without specifically basing it on race. I think a class-based approach would be better. That said, I don't think that affirmative action that targets minorities to try to get them into higher positions within society is necessarily bad. And I also don't think it is necessarily racist, because again, if an institution has 10 slots and you take 9 of those slots are going to white people, and one of those slots are saying, we're going to put a minority in this slot. You haven't really discriminated against any white people. You haven't said a white person can't get into that institution. All you've done is you've made the competition a little stiffer among all of those white people. But also think about if there are 9 spots that go to white people and 1 spot that is specifically for a brown person or a person of color, how much competition does that person have to deal with compared to the average white person? It's a lot more.
Gotcha.
I don't think that when you're looking at hiring people, you should consider. I mean, I think
No, you
if
shouldn't,
you
and
look,
I think you can't. But
yeah, I mean, yeah, but I also think like looking at, I agree with more what you said earlier. It needs to be class based. Looking at dealing with poverty as a whole, and the fact that Black people are hurt by it more will automatically help them even more without you having to focus on race. I think when it comes to like looking at boardrooms and trying to come up with a balance of Black and white and women and men,
yeah, that's
these
weird.
those are treating the symptoms rather than the causes, and I think it actually distracts us from addressing the causes.
Yeah, I mean,
Gotcha.
there was a joke. Okay.
Let's move pretty quick, just because we have a number.
Problem with boardrooms
for
is
you
there's
guys.
too many of them, and not enough of them are on fire. Not that they're not rainbow enough.
All right.
Next.
So my next one is from Gabriel K, and I must have missed this part of the discussion whenever I got kicked out. It says, "Clear your own gate." What the fuck? So a woman in the USA being upset for someone holding the door for her is more important than women being stoned for adultery. Get your bourgeois liberal principles together.
Okay.
Talking about.
Yeah, I think this is directed at me.
But I want to say, can I quickly say that people can focus on small problems and big problems at the same time or exclusively? Like if that's the standard, if that is your standard, then everybody has to just figure out what's the worst thing that is hurting humanity right now, and nobody can speak about anything other than that right now. Like I don't understand. You could like what are you gonna do next? Like, if you want to like, oh my God, there's so many potholes in our street, let's go fill that. Or like, really, you're worried about the potholes in your street? What about people that have no roads at all? Like that.
What aboutism? Yeah. Starving people in China would be happy to have that.
I hate to do this, Brenton, but just...
No, but Brenton didn't say anything. I took his...
this
was...
gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Okay, so...
That was anti-white racism right there, but go on, sorry.
So what this person said, can you read that again, Kay? Because my brain got
It says, clear your own gate. So a woman in the USA being upset for someone holding the door for her is more important than women being stoned for adultery.
Okay, this is adorable almost, because it shows a complete misunderstanding of what women have to deal with, like, when it comes to sexism, like in this country. And I remember being shocked about this. Like, I remember when all stuff was coming out with like Harvey Weinstein and all this stuff, I was like, what, did I miss a meeting or something, guys? Like, I've been a guy my whole life. I've never done or thought anything like this. But apparently there's a bunch of us that are freaking awful. And the thing is that I was really shocked when I went to sit on a jury, because they asked the people at the jury, like, have you ever been the victim of a violent crime, to see if they would be negatively biased, because this was a criminal trial. And so many of the women raised their hand, and one after another admitted to being raped. So when you want to talk about like sexism in the United States and misogyny in the United States, it's not getting mad because somebody didn't hold open a door for you. It's being raped, it's being beaten, it's being killed. And if you, and the actual thing of like women being stoned to death for honor killings, it's really not that different from women being murdered by their spouses for sleeping with another man or being seen to sleep with another man.
Next up, the optimistic pessimist, thanks for your question, said correlation does not equal causation. We don't know that systemic racism is a causal factor for racial disparities or inequalities. It's just one of many hypotheses for racial differences in outcomes.
Well, okay, so if you consider a form of systemic racism to be racism by outcome, that would include, like, that's the reason why that we include that part of the definition, right? So if, again, so this is the difference between racism of the gaps and racism by outcome. So racism of the gap is like a fallacy that people keep blaming things on racism without actually proving that this is because racism. They see disparities everywhere and they think like, oh, this is racism. And when they do that, they're actually talking about intentional, explicit form of racism, and they have no proof for it. That is uncalled for. That is unjustified. But it is justified to look at the outcomes and say like, okay, we controlled for all the variables: crime rates, population, wealth, access to lawyers. After adjusting for all of that, the system is still producing bias against a group of people. If you say like, okay, we don't know if this bias is because of explicit form of racism, it might not be, because there's no way that any study could control for all variables. It might not be because of any form of explicit racism, but the very fact that all justifiable form of variables controlled for is still giving you biased outcomes means that your system is racist against a group of people, even if it's not intended to be so, right? So when you say it doesn't prove that it's racist, well, the definition, based on the definition of what it means to be racist by outcome, it is racist by outcome. I think this person is talking about the explicit or intentional form of racism. And yes, they're right. It doesn't prove that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I would say if that was all we were saying, yeah, but I mean, there's mountains of data. Like a good example being that blacks are not only the blacks and whites use and sell drugs at the same rates, but black people are punished worse and are more often than not prosecuted as opposed to white people. There's the other thing is that black people are both charged with murder most often and exonerated of murder charges most often, like 7 times greater. So
for the same crimes.
Yeah, for the exact same crimes. So anti-black bigotry within the system and system, like that's irrefutable, and there's mountains and mountains of data, and it's not just correlation and causation.
Gotcha. And thanks so much for your question, or I think this might be that last one. If you got that last one from Gabriel Kay, you that one would be for you.
Okay, so Gabriel Kay comes back with, at least under Brenton's dystopian communism, all is oppressed equally and starves equally.
I mean, I'm an anarcho-communist, so how exactly is anything oppressed? There's no state. So what is exactly going to do this? And you can actually look at examples of like real world applications of anarcho-communist principles in Rojava, in Shaipas, in the Ukraine Free Territory, and in Catalonia, Spain, when it was run by anarchists for 3 years. And there was not this horrific repression. This is anti-Soviet propaganda put out by the US government in the 1950s that you're being affected by.
Gotcha. And Spider the Atio, thanks for your super sticker. Appreciate the support. And there is another question, another critic of you, Brenton. So
bring it on. Come on, let's hear this.
Afir, thank you for your question, said, why is Brenton allowed to cover up for racists by redefining words? Stalin used this same technique to make people disappear.
Wait. Stalin redefined words to make people disappear? That's what you're going to say? So first off, like the actual Soviet purges were not Stalin redefining words. What it was Stalin's paranoia. And it wasn't just Stalin, just the ruling class blamed it all on Stalin because he was dead. And none of them wanted to be prosecuted for all the crazy bullshit that went on. I mean, like really, if you look deeply into the Soviet purges, they're horrifying, but it has nothing to do with redefining words. Here's what happened. You didn't even bother to read 1984. You heard someone talking about 1984 and talking about Newspeak, which was limiting the language, not redefining it, but actually eliminating the ability to express things with it. And you said, 1984 was about words, Stalin words, therefore redefining words is Stalinism. It's the most idiotic point that I've ever made. You should be ashamed of yourself. And, everyone is dumber for having heard that.
Very sassy tonight.
I do want to address redefinitions of the word racism. I think it's okay to add to the definition of racism based on its practical use. So I'm okay with having the explicit traditional form of racism, that definition there, and adding these new definition because of the purpose, because of the use that they have. What I don't like is that people who add this new definition and they want to take away the old, like I'm not okay with replacing the definition. I'm okay with the adding definitions. So for people who say that the explicit form of racism is not racism at all, if it's systemic, like they are redefining words. I think it's both of them are useful. I think keep the old one, call it explicit racism, add these new definitions. They do have practical uses.
Gotcha. And then there was a question I sent over to you, Kay, on Twitter.
Another one from Gabriel K, because he seems to be a fan of yours, Brenton.
Oh boy.
Brenton, you need to listen to George Carlin. You are his not my problem typical liberal.
I love George Carlin. Are you kidding? Like George Carlin is like the go-to guy. In fact, my favorite thing about George Carlin is he has a great bit where he like describes toxic masculinity perfectly without ever using the phrase toxic masculinity. Like look up his, it's called, just Google like George Carlin, the male disease. It's the same thing that all these like highly academic feminists were coming up with, but he actually like expressed it on his own really quickly. Carlin's brilliant.
Gotcha. And SpongeBob SquarePants, thank you for your super sticker of support. Appreciate it. Then, Kay, if you had seen that last one in the live chat, had you seen that one from the optimistic pessimist?
I did, but it disappeared on me.
Okay. What I'll do
want to
is
acknowledge all the 1350s that I'm seeing in the live chat.
Jesus.
If you have time.
I will send it over to you, Kay. And in the meantime, I will read another one from Samuel. Glad to hear from you, Samuel. It's always a pleasure to have you. Said to Brenton. Actually, this one's kind of like a nice, easygoing, like it's a good way to end. So maybe what we'll do is, Kay, if you want to read that one from the optimistic pessimist.
But also give me a chance to respond to the 1350s if there's time at the end.
Gotcha.
Yeah, let him respond. We need to respond.
Sure, we have time. What's up?
Oh. No, okay. So a lot of people are missing the point when it comes to 1350. They're like, okay, the black people in the United States are 13% of the population, but they are responsible for 50% of the crime. All the studies that Brenton also mentioned, when they are showing that there is a bias in the justice system and the police system against black people, of course they are adjusting for the crime rates. all these, like, do you really think that the researchers that are their entire career is dependent is based on controlling for as many variables as they possibly can to see what the actual reasons for things? Look at these studies, they're showing that even after they adjust for the crime rates, there's still bias in the system after they take that variable into account. Okay, so look at the studies, guys.
Gotcha.
Yeah, well, and not just that, but also it's just a miscarriage and a misunderstanding of statistics. 50% of the average American has one breast and one testicle. Like, that's a statistical fact. It's the same thing.
We must move to the
just
questions.
one last thing.
We
also,
do,
it's
I
a
know,
response.
but we do have a list of questions, and it seems that you're addressing. Hold on a second. It seems that you're addressing things that you just randomly noticed in the chat, and so it's like, but we do have people that have paid super chats to.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Next up.
Okay, so
go ahead.
we have one from the optimistic pessimist that says, Brenton, I wasn't denying that the system is racist. I was saying the evidence of a racist system does not prove blacks are doing worse than whites because of racism, i.e., there could be biological differences.
I mean, there could be, but you would have to demonstrate that. And we've actually have evidence that there are no reasonable biological differences between blacks and whites. Race is literally skin deep, and humans are one of the least biologically diverse species on this planet. All of us have a single common ancestor from about 1,000 years ago. Literally everyone that lives today is descended from that one guy. And between 50 and 500 BC, everyone in the world who passed on their genetics is either the direct descendant of everyone in the world now or the descendant of no one. We're all a direct descendant of Confucius. We're all a direct descendant of Cleopatra. We're all a direct descendant of, like, I think, Julius Caesar. If you lived in that certain time and you passed on your genetics, they're your direct ancestor. So race does not exist genetically.
Next.
Can I respond to that as well?
Sure.
I just want to acknowledge that so far there has not been any evidence that shows that there's any significant differences, but we do need to prepare people in case there is like data sometimes showing there's some significant differences, because I don't think that us treating people the same should be dependent on the fact that they're all the same. I think we should treat people the same even if there does show one day we prove that there are some biological differences. I think our rights should.
That's a good point. Buchanan would agree with you, actually.
Next up.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Gabriel K says to Brenton, I was born in communism. You know nothing.
I mean, what communism were you born in? I don't think I was advocating the type of communism that wherever you were born that you're mad about. Communism, as in a stateless, classless society, a stateless, classless, moneyless society based on the common ownership of money and the distribution of resources from each according to his ability to each according to their need, has never existed on the planet. Now, I gave examples of anarchism, anarchist socialism in practice, but that's not communism. Communism is an ideal that has not been reached.
Gotcha.
Now, if you're like in the former USSR, I'm sure that sucked, and I apologize for that, but that's not what I'm talking about, so don't strawman me.
Gotcha. And I just sent another one over to you, Kay, if you got that one.
It's from Turbo. Could Brenton please clarify a discriminating against whites with affirmative action doesn't meet the standards of racism?
Discriminating, it doesn't meet the standards of, because racism, as we're talking about, like systemic racism, involves the state and the perception of like authorities like the military and the police, a judge sentencing you more harshly because you're white, not someone else getting an opportunity because they're not white.
I must say, I've seen a lot of definitions of systemic racism. This is the first time I've seen somebody mention that it only can come from the state.
Yeah, well, it's not so much it's generated by the state and sovereign power. This is, it's kind of cutting edge research. I think it only, came out in like 2007. So it's one of the more recent definitions of racism and people going into it. Also, you kind of have to have an anarchist critical framework to fully understand it. And liberals really get very uncomfortable when anyone criticizes the state because they like their institutions. They like their little world that they've built.
Next,
I mean, to be fair, I like them too, but we could debate that later.
Yeah, dude, that's fine to talk about. Yeah.
Samuel Powell, for the last question of the night that we have here. Appreciate it. Samuel says, this one, we got so many for Brenton tonight, but don't worry, this one at least isn't attacking. This one is, they said, to Brenton, what was the most difficult challenge along the Appalachian Trail?
Oh, geez, that's a huge, there's so many great things. So I would say the biggest physical challenge of the Appalachian Trail was like when I hit the White Mountains in New Hampshire, because like I started down south and was coming north, and you start off and you're like hurting it, like you can barely do like 10, 11, 12 miles a day. Then you get to this point where you're like basically professional athlete level shape, and you're doing like, you can do 15, 16 miles a day easily. And like if you want to, like I did a 22-mile day to get to a bar in time so I could, have a couple of cheap beers. When I hit the White Mountains, I was in tip top shape, and suddenly like a 15-mile day felt like a 20-mile day. A 20-mile day was impossible. Meanwhile, while all of this was going on, not only was I having some of the hardest hiking that I ever had to do, but I was getting rained on and hailed on nonstop for weeks. Like my feet looked like golems when I got to the end of that after a week. And it did not it started raining when I got to like, when I got to Vermont, and did not stop until I got to Maine. So yeah, that the whites are just, like that's like the boss, or like the mini boss. The boss itself is Katahdin at the end. But yeah, that was the biggest physical challenge.
That is really interesting, and want to say, folks, want to say first, thanks for all your questions, just hanging out with us tonight in the live chat. Thanks so much, mods, for looking out for whether it be spam or hate speech, whatever it is. We appreciate all of your efforts, and most of all, want to say thanks so much, Brenton and Armin and Kay. It's been a pleasure to have you, and especially Brenton and Armin being in the hot seat, debating these issues. Pleasure to have you. And one quick reminder, everybody, their links are all in the description. We have one last question from Turbo, who just fired a super chat in. Said, you can end the stream, no worries. I just want to point out that the chat that public universities are a component of the state. I think it's a dialogue they have going on in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, public universities are created by the government and funded by tax dollars. They're not the state, but like, at least not in the definition I gave of it. But yeah, I mean,
short and pithy,
government isn't just evil.
Gotcha.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Not in response to that. How much time do I have? No, I just want to quickly say that to people that look like we were. I mean, even if me or Brenton didn't change your opinion on anything, I think the more important point here is that we are able to have friendly civil discussions about some of the most heated topics out there. And I think that is even more, sometimes even more important than changing the other person's opinion, because it seems like these disagreements are being used for a lot of people to hate each other. And these debates, the great thing about them is not just to convince people that which side is right or which side is wrong, but it's also to show people that disagreements doesn't necessarily need to lead to people hating each other. It's possible to have friendly disagreements.
Couldn't
Absolutely.
agree more. Love your philosophy, and that is absolutely true, folks. We hope you feel welcome here, no matter what walk of life you're from. We mean that gay, straight, Christian, atheist, like everybody. We could name everybody, and we just want to let you know we really do hope you feel welcome. So with that, we hope you keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. And one last thanks to our guests, Brenton, Armin, and Kay.
Thank you, guys.
With that, take care, folks, and have a great day. Hopefully we will see you back here, as we have a couple of awesome ones coming up this week in addition. So take care, and we'll see you next time.